After a year off, the Imsa WeatherTech Sports Car Championship makes its return to the streets of Detroit for the 100-minute Detroit Grand Prix. Unlike in previous years though, they won't be running on the beautiful Belle Isle circuit, but rather on a new circuit that navigates through the streets of downtown Detroit. That and more, as this is everything you need to know ahead of the Detroit Grand Prix. The Grand Prix of Detroit has been a regular on the Imsa schedule since the Grand Am and ALMS merger. Up until 2023, Imsa supported IndyCar on the streets of Detroit and on that Belle Isle circuit. However, last year the Detroit Grand Prix moved from the Island circuit to downtown Detroit. The first race on this new downtown track took place last year, but Imsa opted to not send the WeatherTech Sports Car Championship and instead had the Michelin Pilot Challenge race there. They were once again supporting IndyCar, and they featured a 22 car strong GT4 only grid for a 2-hour race. Now, this new downtown Detroit circuit isn't the only new track to join the Imsa schedule recently. Last year, Imsa reintroduced the Indy Road Course to the calendar after a lengthy hiatus. Now, of course, in the lead up to that race at Indy, with Indy being a dedicated race facility, teams were able to get testing time in at the track and help them to better prepare for the race. Teams will not have this same luxury heading into this weekend, as of course, being the streets of a downtown of a major American city, it poses a few more problems with trying to get testing time. And as a result of this, I think that this race at Detroit is gonna be a little bit of a wild card. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I think there's gonna be a lot more emphasis put on practice, and whoever can get the leg up in those practice sessions is going to have a really good chance at winning this race on Saturday. Now, as I mentioned, only the GTP and GTD Pro cars are going to be present in this race. However, we'll still see a healthy 21 cars on the grid. Now, 21 cars doesn't sound like a whole heck of a lot, especially by IMSA standards, but when you consider that this is the shortest racetrack on the IMSA calendar, and arguably the tightest, I think that it's going to be plenty, and traffic is going to be a major deciding factor in this race. We saw it play out this way in last year's Michelin Pilot Challenge race, and that was only a single class race, and I think this year it's going to be no different. Speaking of the Michelin Pilot Challenge, they actually won't be present at Detroit this year. As is often the case when IMSA is supporting IndyCar, there won't be any IMSA Support Series races this weekend. However, they will be making up with that with plenty of Support Series action in a couple weeks at Mid-Ohio. In a recent video, I actually spoke with a new entry who's going to be joining the Michelin Pilot Challenge grid for Mid-Ohio. And I'll link that so that you can check it out. But regardless of all this, I think Mid-Ohio is going to put on a great show. It's going to be great to see some of those support series really get an opportunity to shine at Mid-Ohio. I think there's going to be a ton of good racing. However, we won't be talking about Mid-Ohio until next week. So let's focus back in on Detroit and let's talk about some BOP. Taking a look at the BOP, we see very few changes actually as we look through the GTP classes here. Acura loses a little bit of stint energy. BMW gains some power. Cadillac puts on 8 kilograms of weight while losing some max stint energy. I mean, maybe they're the biggest loser in all of this. And then you have Porsche. They have a slight weight reduction, but also lose some maximum stint energy. And then as for the GTD Pro cars, there are absolutely zero changes from where these cars were at Laguna Seca. And in my opinion, I think that's a good thing. When we're seeing just small little tweaks or no tweaks at all, I think that's an indicator that IMSA has this BOP in a good spot, a place where they like it. And I think that's been reflected in the quality of racing that we've seen in recent races. There's been a variety of different winners, more importantly, a variety of different podium finishers, and we've witnessed some really good racing as a result. As I said a moment ago, there's going to be 21 cars on this year's grid, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they're spread across 2 classes, and starting off with the GTP class, there will be 10 entries there. And then jumping to the GTD Pro class, we'll see 11 entries there. That's an increase from what we usually see in that class. That increase for a sprint race such as this is due to the 34 Conquest Racing Ferrari joining the GTD Pro class this weekend, where Daniel Serra and Albert Costa Balboa will drive that car. They're not the only GTD entry to be making the jump to the Pro class though. We will once again see a second Vassar Sullivan Lexus on the grid, as the car that normally competes under the 12 banner will join the GTD Pro class under the number 15. Regular drivers Parker Thompson and Frankie Montecalvo will pilot that car. Now, of course, there was no WeatherTech Championship race at Detroit last year, so we have to go back 2 years to find our previous winners at Detroit. Back in 2022 was the DPI and the GTD classes that were present, and in DPI it was the 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac, driven by Sebastian Bourdais and Ranger van de Zandert, who took the win at Belle Isle, and will look to back that up with the first win on this track. Meanwhile, in GTD, it was Ben Barnicoat and Kyle Kirkwood who won in the Vassar Sullivan Lexus. Kyle Kirkwood will be present at the track this weekend, but he'll be competing in the IndyCar race, so won't be able to defend that win. But Ben Barnicoat will look to get another victory in Detroit, albeit in the GTD Pro class this time. Now, even though the WeatherTech Championship hasn't visited this new downtown Detroit circuit yet, there are a couple of track characteristics that you'll want to keep an eye out for. The biggest one is, as with many street circuits, it's going to be tough to pass. The circuit features only one truly good passing opportunity, and it's at the end of the longest straight on the track, leading up to turn 3. This heavy braking zone produced plenty of passing in the Pilot Challenge race last year, but it also created quite a bit of carnage as well. I fully expect to see most of our overtakes completed down in this lead up to turn 3, especially considering how narrow the rest of the track is. As for lap times, and it's a little bit of a guess considering the cars haven't raced here yet, but I think we're going to see the GTP cars get down to about the 1 minute and 6 second mark. As for the GTD Pros, I think we'll see them get down into the 1:10 or 1:11 second mark. And with that in mind, considering that there's not going to be a whole ton of lap time separating these two classes, I think it's going to make traffic that much worse. Again, it's a street circuit. This track is very, very narrow. But I think it's going to be even more difficult for those quicker GTP cars to get around the slower GTD Pro cars, because there's just not that many passing opportunities. Even for other classes to get around each other, there's not that many opportunities around this track. I mean, after some of the overtakes that we saw at Long Beach, though, I don't think that's going to stop some. For the most part, though, I think we're going to see that this race, especially when it comes to traffic, is going to require a lot of patience and a little bit of luck to navigate that traffic safely and efficiently. Now finally, we could not talk about this race without talking about the unique pit road. Due to the space constraints at Detroit, the pit lane features pit stalls on both sides of pit lane, kind of in a double barrel format. This unique configuration will see all of the GTD Pro entries boxed on the driver's left-hand side of the pits, and all of the GTP entries having their pit stalls on driver's right. This shouldn't cause any issues during pit stops under a full course yellow condition, because both of these classes are going to be pitting separately. However, it could come into play during green flag pit stops if we see a mix of GTD and GTP traffic boxing at the same time. That could get interesting. Looking at the weather forecast now, and thanks to Racecast Weather for yet another forecast, on Friday it looks sunny for qualifying. But as we switch over to Saturday, it is supposed to be 80 degrees Fahrenheit or about 27 Celsius. Of course, the Imsa race is taking place in the late afternoon, so if that timeline bumps up a little bit, we could see rain become a factor, but right now, it doesn't look like that's likely. We've talked about the unknowns of this race, and we've talked about how this is going to be a bit of a wild card race, but really, that's why when I'm making my picks, I'm going with a couple of wild cards. In GTP, give me the number 25 BMW of Connor De Filippi and Nick Yololi. They looked like they had the speed of a podium finisher at Long Beach. They looked impressive, and they've had some solid pace the last few rounds. They've been competitive, they showed pace on the first street race of the season. Give me BMW to pick up their first win of the season. In GTD Pro, I think it's a really big toss-up. There's lots of unknowns going into this race, but whenever you have a home race, it sure helps to motivate you a little bit more. That's why, in the shadow of the GM headquarters, give me the number 4 Corvette of Nicky Katzberg and Tommy Milner to pick up their first IMSA win in the Z06 GT3R. It would be a storyline ending to the weekend, and while I considered it sure would be great for Ford to win in Detroit as well, I just don't think that Ford is quite at that level yet, so give me the Corvette with the recent pace that they showed at Laguna Seca. Taking a look at the point standings now, presented by P1 Web Development. If you're looking for a custom website, then look no further than P1 Web Development. You can check them out by heading to p1webdevelopment.com or clicking the first link in the description. In GTP, it's number 7, Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 that leads with 1,357 points. They are 50 points ahead of the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac. And the only other class present this weekend in GTD Pro, it's the number 77 AO Racing Porsche. Rexy leads there with 981 points. They are 56 points ahead of the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus and 93 points ahead of the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW. Now there's no support series scheduled to race this weekend, so it's just the WeatherTech Championship. And they'll get things kicked off on Friday at 4:35 p.m. Eastern Time for qualifying. You can catch those qualifying sessions on Imsa TV or Peacock. Before we flip the calendar over to Saturday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, the Imsa WeatherTech Sports Car Championship will take to the track for their 100-minute Detroit Grand Prix, and you can catch that on Imsa TV, Peacock, and USA Network. I'll also be doing a watch-along right here on the Off in the S's YouTube channel, so I hope to see you there. Now, we might not have all of the WeatherTech Championship classes present this weekend in Detroit, but that doesn't mean that we don't have plenty of news to talk about. In fact, I break down all of the recent IMSA news right here. Huge shout out to all of the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, then you can head to patreon.com/offinthes or click the join button below. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.